This video is going to be about Pisces, or the 12th house energy, and how this can show up as the abused child. So if we know anything about the psychology of Pisces as an archetype, it's that Pisces seeks to dissolve boundaries in order to merge with the other, and the other could be described as Source, God, the collective unconscious. It's where the personal identity or ego ceases to exist, or seems to cease to exist, in order to float around in this nebulous pool that is filled with nobody and everyone at the same time. If you had the moon in Pisces or the 12th house, this could look like a lack of an internal egoic identity that's separate from others. If you had the sun in Pisces or the 12th house, this could look like a lack of an authentic external role or ability to express oneself separate from others. Pisces takes the desire to perfect or for perfection from its opposing sign of Virgo and turns this desire into a specific ideal, which is often fantastical in nature. This is because one thing that Pisces rules is fantasy and illusion. Pisces cannot live in the reality of what is, but lives in their own reality of what can or should be. In traditional or classic astrology, the 12th house was the house of self-undoing or self-destruction, and that's why it was considered such a bad omen for those born with this placement. And this goes along with the delusion and self-sabotage that often accompanies those who have a more personal planet or point in Pisces or the 12th house. So now we're going to go into abuse and how this connects to the Pisces 12th house archetype. So the reality of what is the true identity, whether that's the solar identity or the lunar identity, or the masculine or feminine, that had to be suppressed, or even worse, was never developed due to the abuse experienced. So because the true self of the Pisces individual has been abused, oppressed, neglected, not seen, it's had to go underground into the subconscious for survival reasons. The person's true self, or their reality, is not able to be accessed by the individual because of the abuse. So because they don't have that, that strong, healthy ego had never had the chance to be developed, they have to return to fantasy and, the life that maybe could be or should be, or some type of coping fantasy that they had to come up with to survive, now becomes their reality. And then if we go on from there, this false idealized reality that was constructed from the abuse is identified with suffering, and this produces different false identities such as the savior, saint, martyr, victim, addict, psychic, mystic, or psychotic, that are all associated with the archetype of Pisces. The false identity of the solar or lunar Piscean is caught up in and identified with suffering because abuse is what in some cases they have only ever known. And in this way, suffering becomes confused with love. As we all know, the search for love is a primary human drive, and children, there's been case studies done in history where children who had food and water but no human connection have actually died just, from the lack of connection. So these are things that have actually happened throughout history. And it highlights the importance, the need for love and connection is primary, even above, the needs of the body and the physiological needs of survival. The abused child confuses things like enabling codependency, enmeshment, and lack of personal boundaries with love. And again, that's because this is what they were taught through the modeling of the abuser through their parents. There's usually an abuser and a codependent or an enabler type thing going on between both the parents. In this way, they learned that true love is about putting others before their self, which is simply not true. And this is where the suffering part comes in. They have this false idea that love is about caring for and taking care of the abuser. And that's because that's the way the abuser sets it up to be, so that they can continue in whatever things they need to do for their own survival, whether that's an addiction, whether that's their narcissism. And this whole dynamic sets the child up to carry out the specific role assigned to them by the addict or the narcissist parent into their adulthood until they begin the healing process. And the specific Piscean identity that manifests will correlate to the role that the abuser assigns the child. There's a thing called family system roles, and in addicted homes or narcissistic homes, the addict or the narcissist assigns these different roles in order to keep the family functioning, at some type of level, because without that, everything would be total chaos and ruin. So it's sort of like the abuser, the addict or the narcissist will assign their different responsibilities onto each child and will project that onto them so that they can continue in their bad habits or their abuse. So, for example, one of those roles is the scapegoat, and this is the child whom the abuser defines as the quote-unquote bad child or the black sheep of the family. And this child will end up taking on the darker identities of Pisces, which are the addict, victim, psychotic, or psychic, while another child who fills a different role, such as the golden child, will take on the less dark identities of savior, saint, martyr, or mystic that are associated with Pisces. So if we go back to the different identities associated with the archetype of Pisces, we have the addict, victim, psychotic, or psychic. This is the more shadow or darker expression of Pisces, and the child that's given the role of scapegoat will often embody these types of identities as they grow into their adult life, while the golden child will take on, the less dark identities of the savior, saint, martyr, mystic of Pisces. So the role assigned to each child will usually correlate to the energies found in the child's south node as the soul is reliving a past life identity and playing out the karma associated with it in this life. So, for instance, the child who ends up becoming the scapegoat will have specific past life experiences that correlate to this role, And they will carry those forward. They will be seen in the birth chart, and they will carry these energies forward into their present life to be worked out through the abuser. And if you guys are interested in learning more about this topic, I'll be doing a video on the correlation between abusive family roles and astrology, and it'll be using that title. So you can look for that. Going back on topic, it doesn't matter if you are given the role of saint or sinner. If you're the golden child, you're the saint. If you're the scapegoat, you're the sinner. Because both of these roles are toxic and unhealthy, as they are both identified with suffering in one form or another. So if you look at the specific roles of Pisces, they all involve this suffering, this I'm ceasing to exist so that I can just float, this personal me can float away and combined with this other, this God, this source, this universe. And for every human experience, there's a shadow expression, and then there's a healthy light expression. And I'm not saying that the experience or the desire for transcendence is in and of itself negative, but it can be expressed both ways, where, if it is coming from an unhealthy or a shadow expression, it'll be, I had to surrender or give up my self-identity in order to survive so that I could, go after this primary need of love, because that's what the child does. They do whatever they need to. They take on whatever role the abuser assigns them out of this need, for love, and to try to figure out how to get that from the abuser. And it also has to do with survival. They know that if they don't they feel that if they don't live up to the abuser's needs, that maybe the abuser won't have any need for them, and they'll be, thrown out of the house or physically abused. There's always some survival component to it. But those are the two primary drives, is for love and survival. So the solar or lunar Pisceans have subconscious programming around suffering, and will therefore subconsciously gravitate towards life experiences that cause them to suffer. The programming's in place, the association with suffering equaling survival and or love is already there. And if this occurs in childhood, you've never known anything else. How can you even be aware, conceive of a reality that's different to something that you've never experienced? And that's why this is subconscious. It goes way back. Sometimes, as early into our lives as infancy, where we can't remember any of this stuff. It's subconscious, and it's just the way that we're programmed. This is a very sad and tragic reality, and one that can be very shocking and traumatic for the Piscean individual to come to terms with, as this realization dawns on them that they've subconsciously been self-generating their own suffering throughout their adult lives based on that initial programming. As this realization dawns on the awareness of their conscious mind, there's a lot of things that can happen. There's a lot of shock, there's trauma, there's guilt, there's all these horrible feelings that can come up. In his book, Pluto, Volume 2, evolutionary astrologer Jeffrey Wolf Green identifies the Pisces-Virgo axis as that of the sadomasochist. The masochist is associated with Pisces and the victim, while Virgo is associated with the sadist or the abuser. So these are their true roles, but the sadist, which would be the Virgo energy, feels as though they are the victim, and they therefore externalize their pain in the form of abusing others, while the true victim, or the masochist, which would be the Pisces individual, will feel they are truly deserving of the abuse. And this goes along with how each archetype and how each person handles their own guilt. So the masochist handles their own guilt by atoning for their quote-unquote sins, while the sadist handles their guilt through anger projected at others. After many years of chart reading on thousands of individuals, Jeffrey Wolf Green found that those whose charts predominantly feature the Pisces 12th house or Virgo 6th house axis by placement such as the nodes along this axis or a stellium of planets along this axis are likely to be either the sadist or the masochist in their relationships. So if you're interested in learning more about this relationship dynamic, I will be doing a video titled The Pisces Virgo Axis and Abusive Relationships. People who were abused as children will subconsciously engage in abuse as adults. And because this process is unconscious, they won't be able to see this pattern. And it's not until they have the capacity mixed with a desire to heal that they will be able to see this pattern. So the desire alone is not enough to begin the healing process. So if you would like to heal, you also need two other things, which are knowledge and action. And knowledge comes by learning what healthy relating to oneself looks like. And unfortunately, this is something that abused children never learned how to do. So they will have to learn this for the first time as adults. They'll have to learn what self-love is, what healthy relating to themselves first, and then they can take that out and apply it to their relationships, but what that even looks like, because it's not something that they're familiar with. So if you're interested in starting the knowledge portion of healing, one thing that I highly recommend is the Personal Development School. They have a website and a YouTube channel, and on the website there's an attachment quiz, and it will help you identify what your primary attachment style is. And then once you have that information, the Personal Development School YouTube channel has tons of great videos on each attachment style. So that would be a great way to get knowledge. And I recommend learning about attachment styles for healing because it describes the processes and the patterning involved with how you were able to form an attachment. In the case of abused children, this is going to be an unhealthy attachment to your early caregivers or parents. And what this does is it allows you to see, it allows you to see consciously what are my patterns in relationships, not only to other people, but to myself. And it explains why those patterns are and how they operate. So then the action part of healing is doing the work or taking the knowledge that you gain about how to relate to yourself in a healthy way and then applying that knowledge to your actual life. And this is where you need courage, because reteaching your loved ones how to treat you will be very scary in the beginning. You'll have fears pop up, and you'll imagine that if you try to stand up for yourself, that you're whoever you're communicating with will treat you the way that the abuser did. And I personally found that this is rarely the case. This is just a fear that we have, that we developed out of that survival strategy. But even if it were true, you're an adult now and you're able to care for yourself. So the first step is always scary to take, but the second step is always much easier than the first. So if you can muster up enough courage and enough will to take that initial step and to apply what you've learned in the areas of self-care, self-love, self-respect, boundaries, all those things that are included in healthy self-relating, then it's the beginning of being able to reprogram your brain and to realize, okay, well, I did this and my fear didn't come true. The person didn't attack me. They didn't hit me. They didn't call me names. They didn't, whatever, fill in the blank, whatever your past experiences have been. And it's only in this way that you can begin to reprogram those, those programs that you do have around suffering and how suffering doesn't equal love. I don't have to suffer to be loved. I don't have to make somebody else suffer to be loved. I'm not a savior and I'm not a victim. I'm not a saint or a sinner. I'm just me. And then when you realize that, you could stop playing all those specific roles that are associated with this archetype of Pisces and come to the meeting of your true self and who you really are for the first time. Okay, well, that's going to wrap up this video. Hopefully this was helpful. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, take care.